pay an extra $500 a month, or get out. That's what my own daughter told me. In the living room of a house, I secretly paid $600. 000 cash for. She saw me as a charity case, a financial burden. She didn't know I was a millionaire. But she and her brother, they were about to find out exactly how poor their old man really was. This is the story of how I took back my life. If you believe respect is something you earn, note demand. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. The smell of roasted chicken has always been a time machine for me. Its scent of rosemary and garlic instantly transporting me back to simpler days with Eleanor. She used to say a good roast could solve half the world's problems. I'm not sure about the world, but it certainly used to solve mine. Tonight, however, the rich, savory aroma felt like an imposter in my own home. It filled the cavernous dining room, clinging to the heavy velvet curtains I'd chosen with her. Yet I sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, feeling like a piece of forgotten furniture. My daughter, Chloe, was absorbed by the blue light of her phone, her thumb gliding across the screen in a quick, dismissive rhythm that had become the background music of our lives. Her husband, Mark, stood at the sideboard, carving the glistening bird with a theatrical flourish. The electric knife buzzed with an irritating, mechanical efficiency. A sound that grated on the quiet dignity of the room. He held up a perfect, thick slice of breast meat, juice dripping from its edges. "Look at that. Honey, absolute perfection," he announced, laying it on her plate as if it were a trophy. He carved another for himself, then another. He didn't so much as glance in my direction until he was halfway through, arranging his own portion of potatoes. "You want white or dark meat?" "Quincy," he asked, the name still feeling sharp and unnatural in my ears. "Not Dad. Quincy." It had been Quincy for the last year or so. A subtle, deliberate shift that felt like a formal demotion within my own family. "A little of both is fine." "Mark." "Thank you," I said. My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the high, ornate ceilings. He slid a plate down the long, mirror-like surface of the table. It stopped a good foot away from me with a quiet scrape, and I had to lean forward, my back protesting. To pull it closer, as I cut into a piece of chicken, the silence was filled by their conversation, a tightly woven bubble of words that I couldn't seem to penetrate. "I was talking to the contractor today," Mark said, his mouth full of roasted potato. "He thinks we can definitely knock down that wall into the living room. Create a real open concept space. Imagine it during the holidays. It would be incredible for entertaining." "Oh, I saw the most amazing kitchen island on Pinterest." "Mark," Chloe added, her eyes finally lighting up. Not for the family at her table, but for the idea of a remodeled kitchen, a single slab of Carrara marble, with a waterfall edge. It would completely transform the feel of our space. Our space. The words hung in the air, heavier than the scent of the roast, more chilling than the draft from the bay window. This house, this very space, they were so eager to tear apart and rebuild in the image of a social media post, was a monument to a lifetime of quiet work and a secret I had guarded for nearly 2 decades. I remembered the day Eleanor and I first saw it. It was a year after the numbers on a flimsy piece of paper changed my world forever. The lottery win. Not a staggering, headline-grabbing jackpot, but a quiet, solid $1. $8 million after taxes. It was enough to change everything, but I chose to let it change almost nothing on the surface. Eleanor was the only one who knew, and she had been my anchor of reason. We were sitting at our small kitchen table in the old house, the ticket lying between us like a sacred object. The kids need to make their own way. "Quincy," she'd said, her hand covering mine, "money you don't earn is like a sweet poison. It rots you from the inside out." She was right. Of course. When she passed, the silence in that small home became a physical weight, pressing down on me. So I bought this one. A 3-story colonial in the most peaceful part of Oak Ridge, Ohio. I paid $600. 0 inches cash for it. A fortress built not of brick and mortar, but of memories and grief. I told the children I was renting it. A strange extravagance for a retired electrical engineer on a modest pension, but they accepted it without much question. When Chloe and Mark fell on hard times 5 years ago, their boutique clothing business failing, I offered them a lifeline disguised as a living arrangement. They could move in, take the expansive master suite and the entire second floor, and I would move into the 3rd-floor attic suite. All I asked was that I could live with my family again. To make it seem legitimate, I offered to contribute. I became a tenant in the house I owned outright. The first of every month had its own cold, silent ritual. I would sit at the small oak desk in my room, the one I'd had since my college dorm, and take out my checkbook. I'd carefully fill out the date, Chloe's name, and the amount $2. Ling, ling, ling. Ling, ling. I used my favorite fountain pen, a heavy, perfectly balanced Waterman that Eleanor had given me for my 50th birthday. The ink was a deep, presidential blue. The act of writing the check felt like a small, private betrayal of her memory. I'd walk down the 2 flights of stairs, each step creaking a quiet complaint, and find Chloe. This morning was no different. She was in the gleaming kitchen, tapping at her tablet, a cup of designer coffee steaming beside her. The air smelled of espresso and entitlement. "Morning, Dad," she said, her eyes locked on the screen, hair greeting automatic. "Good morning, sweetheart. Here you are." I held out the check. She paused her scrolling and took it from my fingers. Her touch brief and cool. She glanced at the number, folded it once, and slipped it into the pocket of her silk robe without a word. "No thank you." Not even a nod. Her fingernails, I noticed, were painted a shade of deep crimson that looked expensive and flawless. I wondered, with a dull ache, if my rent check had paid for them. On top of this, I paid for all the utilities. Another $1,000 a month, transferred directly from my pension account like clockwork. The rest of my lottery winnings, over $1 million now, sat in a high-yield savings account, a silent, patient dragon guarding its hoard. Back in my room, the quiet was a welcome blanket. It was the only part of the house that still felt like it belonged to me. The walls were lined with my old engineering textbooks, their spines cracked and faded, and photo albums filled with smiling ghosts. The air smelled of old paper, worn leather, and cedar. Under my bed, concealed by a dust ruffle, was a small, heavy safe. It was old, black, and stubbornly analog. I knelt down, the joints in my 77-year-old knees groaning in protest, and spun the familiar combination dial. Left, right, left. The heavy door swung open with a low groan and a satisfying thud. Inside, nestled between stacks of municipal bonds and my last will and testament, was a thick, cream-colored document, the deed to this house. My name, Earl Quincy Adams, was printed in clear, elegant type. Sole owner. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal at the bottom. It felt solid. Real. A tangible piece of the truth in a life that had become a careful fabrication. It was my anchor in this strange, reversed world where I was a guest in my own life. Beside it lay my favorite picture of Eleanor, taken on our 40th anniversary. Her smile so bright and genuine, it could have powered a city. I gently closed the heavy steel door. The sound of the bolt locking into place, echoing the way my own heart felt sealed off and guarded. The shrill, digital ring of my phone sliced through the peace. I glanced at the screen. It was Leo, my son. My stomach tightened. His calls were rarely social. "Hey, Dad," he started. His voice already rushed. "Leo, it's good to hear from you. How are you?" "Son." "Busy." "Dad." "Really busy. Listen, I'm in a bit of a tight spot with this new venture. It's an app for, well, it's complicated. The point is, the suppliers want a bigger deposit up front than I budgeted for. I need a small loan. Just $5. Ling ling ling. I'm good for it. You know that." His ventures were always new, always complicated, and they always needed a small loan. I'd funded 3 of his failed startups over the years before I finally, painfully, decided to turn off the tap. The last small loan had funded a bespoke coffee roasting business that never managed to roast a single bean. I'm sorry, Leo. The pension is stretched thin as it is. I just don't have that kind of cash lying around, I said, the lie tasting like rust in my mouth. A sharp, frustrated sigh crackled on the other end. Right. The pension. I forgot. Okay. Well, I gotta run. Talk to you later. The line went dead. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He never did. I placed the phone back on its cradle, the plastic cool against my skin. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. Later that afternoon, a soft, hesitant knock came at my door. It was Maya, my granddaughter, Chloe's 9-year-old daughter. She was holding 2 mugs, steam gently rising from them like tiny ghosts. "Hey, Grandpa," she said, her smile, the first genuine thing I'd seen all day. "I made some chamomile tea. I brought you a honey stick, too. Thought you might like some." She was the only one who ever came up to my 3rd-floor sanctuary without a specific, transactional reason. She'd sit on the old, worn armchair by the window and tell me about her classes at the community college. Her eyes shining as she talked about the intricate ecosystems of the deep ocean. She was bright and kind, a wildflower growing in a meticulously manicured but sterile garden. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very thoughtful of you. Come in. Sit." We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the warmth of the ceramic mug seeping into my old, tired hands. It felt like the first real warmth I'd felt all day. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed with a sincere concern that felt like a balm on an old wound. "You seem lonely up here sometimes. And Mom and Dad, they seem really stressed about money lately. More than usual." I managed a small smile and patted her hand. "Old people are always okay, Maya. It's our job to be. Now, tell me about that octopus documentary you were watching. Did you know they can solve puzzles? I couldn't burden her with the truth. She was the one good thing. The one relationship that wasn't tainted by the silent, suffocating weight of my secret fortune. As evening settled and the house grew quiet, I walked downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water. The door to the study, which Mark now used as a home office, was slightly ajar. I could hear their voices inside, low but tense. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I froze when I heard my name. He's just sitting on all that space upstairs, Chloe was saying, her voice a sharp, frustrated whisper. His pension and Social Security have to be more than he lets on. It's not like he does anything. He's just here. We can't afford that trip to Aspen if we don't increase our income stream somehow. It's dead money. Mark. So what are you suggesting? Mark asked, his voice cautious. I'm suggesting his contribution isn't even close to the market rate for a full suite this size. Not in this neighborhood, she said, her voice turning cold and hard as steel. It's time we had a real, businesslike conversation about it. I saw her shadow move, and through the crack in the door, I saw her glance up the main staircase. Her gaze aimed directly towards my third-floor room. It wasn't the look of a daughter. It was the look of a landlord assessing an underperforming asset. I backed away silently, my hand pressed against the wall to steady myself. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. An income stream. A property to be leveraged. That's what I was. I was in my room an hour later, the pages of an old novel blurring before my eyes. When the knock came, it was a sharp, official rap on the wood. Not Maya soft. Questioning tap. I took a slow breath and opened the door. Chloe was standing there, her arms crossed, her posture rigid. Her face was a mask of neutral resolve. "Dad," she said, her tone flat and devoid of any warmth, any history of our shared lives. "We need to talk tomorrow. It's about your living situation here." Her words. "We need to talk tomorrow," were not an invitation. They were a summons. They hung in the air between us in the dimly lit hallway, cold and heavy as iron. I simply nodded, the muscles in my neck feeling tight, and closed my door. The quiet click of the latch felt like the locking of a cell. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced silence. I didn't go down for my customary cup of evening tea. I couldn't bear the thought of encountering them again. I couldn't bear to see the strategic coldness in my own daughter's eyes. I sat in my armchair, the old leather cool against my skin, and listened to the sounds of the house, a house that felt less like mine with every passing hour. I heard their laughter from the television room below, a sound that felt alien and mocking. I heard the pipes groan as they prepared for bed. And then, finally, silence. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a coiled as root-on, waiting silence, thick with unspoken intentions. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and shallow, plagued by dreams of Eleanor. In them, she was always just out of reach, her back to me, looking out at a gray, featureless sea. I'd call her name, but the wind would snatch the words from my lips. I woke before dawn. The sky outside my window, a bruised purple. My heart, a dull, heavy stone in my chest. The dread of the coming talk was a physical thing, a sour taste in the back of my throat. At 10 o'clock sharp, as if on a corporate schedule. Chloe sent me a text. Living room in 5. Not a call. Not a knock on the door. A text. I walked down the stairs, each step a deliberate, measured act. I felt like a man walking to his own sentencing. They were waiting for me in the formal living room, a space we never used. It was a showroom, filled with stiff, elegant furniture that no one ever sat on, and books with pristine spines that no one ever read. The air was still and smelled faintly of lemon polish. Chloe and Mark were seated together on the long, cream-colored sofa. A united front. A gleaming laptop was open on the coffee table between them. This wasn't a family chat. This was an ambush. "Dad, have a seat," Chloe said, gesturing to the armchair opposite them. Her voice was level, practiced, the voice of someone who had rehearsed their lines. I sat down, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Mark cleared his throat and leaned forward, adopting the air of a financial advisor about to deliver bad news. "Quincy," he began, "we've been running the numbers, and we wanted to be completely transparent with you about the household finances." He turned the laptop towards me. On the screen was a spreadsheet, a dizzying array of columns, rows, and brightly colored charts. It was a masterpiece of financial fiction. I saw line items for property value depreciation, landscape maintenance overheads, and interior capital amortization. I'd been an engineer for 45 years. I knew how to read a balance sheet, and I knew how to spot nonsense when I saw it. "As you can see," Chloe chimed in, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at a pie chart, "your contribution, while appreciated, currently only covers about 60% of the market rate for a suite of this size and amenities, not even factoring in the shared space access." The corporate jargon was so absurd, so alien to the concept of family, that for a moment I felt a dizzying sense of dislocation. Was this my daughter, the little girl I taught to ride a bike, who used to fall asleep with her head on my chest? With inflation, the rising property taxes, and the general cost of upkeep for a property of this magnitude, Mark continued, his tone smooth and reasonable, "We simply have no choice. The numbers don't lie. We need to adjust your contribution to be more in line with the current reality." He named a new figure, an extra $500 a month, $2,500 in total. It was more than my entire monthly pension check. They knew that. They had to know that. I looked from the spreadsheet to their faces. They were earnest, serious, their expressions carefully composed to convey reluctant necessity, but I saw something else in their eyes. A hard, calculating glint. This wasn't about necessity. It was about Aspen. It was about a marble kitchen island. I took a slow and deep breath, my hands resting on the arms of the chair. "Chloe, Mark," I began, my voice quiet but firm. "I live on a fixed income. You know what my pension is. An extra $500 a month is not something I can afford." I expected negotiation, perhaps a feigned expression of sympathy. I did not expect what came next. Chloe's face, which had been a mask of reasoned concern, dropped. The warmth, however artificial, vanished completely. Her eyes turned to chips of ice. "Then you have 30 days," she said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "Pay the rent, or get out. This is a house, not a charity." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. They seemed to suck all the air from the room. Get out. Out of the home I had bought with my own money. Out of the life I had built as a refuge from my grief. Mark didn't flinch. He just looked at his wife. A small, approving nod, his only contribution, the united front. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. The truth of my situation was laid bare. Stripped of all pretense of family or affection, I was an asset, and I was underperforming. I stood up, my old bones protesting, and walked out of the room. I felt their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I walked up the 2 flights of stairs to my attic suite, each step feeling heavier than the last, and closed the door behind me. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. I stood there, my back against the wood, and for a long moment, I couldn't move. My heart wasn't pounding, it was a dull, heavy thud against my ribs. A slow, painful beat. A tremor started in my hands, and I had to clench them into fists to make it stop. The initial shock, the raw, stinging hurt of her words, began to recede, and in its place, something else began to rise. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of my youth. It was a cold, clear, and quiet anger. It was the anger of a man who had finally, irrevocably been pushed too far. I walked over to the small table where the picture of Eleanor sat. I picked up the silver frame, my thumb tracing the outline of her smiling face. The glass was cool to the touch. They crossed a line. Eleanor, I whispered to the photograph, my voice raspy. The one you and I drew in the sand a long time ago. The one about respect, à bout de sens. She smiled back at me from behind the glass, her eyes full of the life and love they had stolen from this house. In that moment, the years of quiet sacrifice, of biting my tongue, of playing the part of the grateful, impoverished father, coalesced into a single, hard point of resolve. The performance was over. The secret I had kept to protect them from the sweet poison of unearned money would now become the very weapon of my own liberation. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my armchair by the window, watching the moon trace a slow, silver path across the sky. I didn't wrestle with the decision. The decision had been made for me the moment my daughter gave me an ultimatum. Instead, I spent the night planning buy or enter. I let the engineer in my mind take over. The part of me that saw problems not as emotional crises, but as complex systems requiring logical, sequential solutions. The grief and hurt were still there. A low, burning fire in my chest. But now they were fuel. By the time the first pale light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I knew my first step. The next morning, I waited until I heard Chloe and Mark's cars pull out of the driveway. I took out my old, slightly outdated smartphone, a concession to modern life that Maya had insisted upon, and opened the web browser. My fingers, stiff with arthritis, fumbled on the small screen. I typed top realtors in Oak Ridge, Ohio. The search returned a list of smiling faces and glowing testimonials. I scrolled past the flashy, aggressive-looking firms. My eyes landed on a name that felt different: Harrison and Sons Realty. It sounded old-fashioned, established, trustworthy. The photo of the principal, Raymond Harrison, showed a man about my own age, with kind eyes and a professional but not slick smile. I wrote down the number. I couldn't make the call from the house. I couldn't risk being overheard. I put on my coat, walked out the back door, and went into the garden. It was a crisp autumn day, the air sharp and clean. I walked to the old stone bench at the far end of the yard. the one Eleanor and I had installed ourselves. I sat there for a long moment, the cold stone seeping through my trousers, gathering my courage. Then, I dialed the number. A pleasant voice answered. I asked for Mr. Harrison. Raymond Harrison, speaking. A calm, steady voice said a moment later. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept my own voice as level as I could. Mr. Harrison, my name is Quincy Adams. I have a delicate property matter I'd like to discuss with you. In person, if possible. There was a brief pause. Of course. Mr. Adams, discretion is the cornerstone of my business. Would you be able to meet for coffee this afternoon? Somewhere neutral. There's a quiet place called The Daily Grind on the other side of town. He was already one step ahead of me. That would be perfect, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. We met at 3. The Daily Grind was small and smelled of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. I saw him sitting in a booth at the back. Just as he'd described, he stood up as I approached, his handshake firm and dry. After we ordered, I didn't waste time with small talk. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. I slid it across the table. This is the matter I wish to discuss. He opened it and took out the document inside. I watched his face as he read. His eyebrows rose slightly. He read it again, then looked from the deed to me, his professional calm momentarily replaced by unconcealed surprise. Mr. Adams, he said, lowering his voice. This deed states that you are the sole owner of the property at 112 Willow Lane, paid in full. That's correct, I said. But my records show the primary residents are a Chloe and Mark Bishop. My daughter and her husband. I explained. They live there. They believe they are the homeowners. And they believe I am their tenant. A tenant to whom they have just given 30 days' notice to vacate. Raymond Harrison sat back, a long, low whistle escaping his lips. He looked at me with a newfound respect. Mr. Adams, this is highly unusual, but rest assured, my fiduciary duty is to you, and you alone. Your secret is safe with me. Tell me, what is it you want to do? I want to sell it, I said, the words feeling more powerful than any I had spoken in years. I want to sell the house, and I need it done quietly and quickly. They can't know, not until it's over. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a predatory smile, but the smile of a man who appreciated a complex problem and a just cause. A pocket listing. He said, already thinking. We don't put it on the public market. I reach out to my private network of serious buyers. We arrange private showings. It can be done. For the next hour, we laid out the groundwork, the logistics, the legalities, the careful dance of deception that would be required. As we talked, I felt a part of myself that had been dormant for years begin to stir, the meticulous planner, the engineer who built things. I was no longer a victim. I was building my escape. A surge of strength, cold and clear, as a winter morning, flowed through me. I felt in control. I left the coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in a decade. The weight on my shoulders had been replaced by a sense of purpose. When I got home, the house was quiet. I walked into the living room, the scene of my morning's humiliation, and stopped dead. Mark was standing in the middle of the room, a tape measure in his hand. He was talking animatedly on his phone. No. The whole wall has to go. He was saying, "We'll open it all the way up to the dining room. Imagine the sight lines. It'll be an entertainer's dream. It'll definitely increase our property value by at least 10%. He clicked the tape measure shut and turned, finally noticing me standing there. He gave me a brief, dismissive nod. "Just planning for the future. Quincy," he said with a self-satisfied smirk. I just looked at him, at the wall he was so eager to demolish, in the house he thought was his. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled. It was a small, private smile. A secret I held all to myself. He had no idea what kind of future I was planning. Mark's self-satisfied smirk hung in the air long after he'd turned and walked away. Just planning for the future. Quincy. His words echoed in the cavernous living room, a space filled with the ghosts of my own plans, my own future with Eleanor. My small, secret smile felt like a shield, a thin but resilient barrier against the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the man. He was measuring walls in a house he didn't own, planning a future on a foundation of lies, completely oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath his feet was about to give way. The war had begun, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a tape measure and the silent hardening of my own resolve. The next few days were a masterclass in deception. I became an actor in my own home, playing the part of the meek, forgetful old man with an almost grim satisfaction. I would nod absently when Chloe talked about her new design ideas, and I'd listen with feigned interest as Mark discussed contractors. Inside, I was a coiled spring of tension and purpose. Every interaction was a careful dance on a tightrope stretched over a canyon of truth. My first move came 2 days later. On a Tuesday morning, this was the most critical step, the one that required a performance worthy of an award. I waited until Chloe and Mark were both in the kitchen, distracted by their morning coffee and their glowing screens. I walked in, holding a letter I had meticulously typed and printed the night before on old, cream-colored paper to make it look official. I'd even found an old company letterhead from my days at the engineering firm. I cleared my throat, making sure my voice had a slight tremor of excitement. "Chloe. Mark. You won't believe this." Chloe looked up from her tablet, her expression one of mild annoyance at being interrupted. "What is it?" "Dad. My old firm." I began, holding up the letter. "They have this program for retirees. A lottery. Of sorts. For appreciation. And, well, I won." Mark finally looked up from his phone, a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Won what?" "A little getaway," I said, trying to inject as much frail excitement as I could into my voice. "It's a 2-night stay at that new resort and spa up by the lake. The one with the golf course. It includes a dinner for 2 at their fancy restaurant and a spa credit. It's for this coming Saturday." I watched their faces. Chloe's initial annoyance was melting away, replaced by a familiar, calculating gleam. Mark was already straightening up. A free luxury weekend. It was like waving a piece of steak in front of starving wolves. "Are you serious?" Chloe asked, taking the letter from my hand. She scanned the details I had so carefully invented. "This is actually really nice." "I can't use it." "Of course," I said with a dismissive wave of my hand. "All that fuss for an old man like me. No. But it's transferable." I thought, "Well? I thought you two work so hard. You deserve a break." The hook was set. Their sense of entitlement did the rest of the work. They didn't question the flimsy premise or the convenient timing. Why would they? In their world, they were owed these little luxuries. By the end of breakfast, they were online, booking their spa treatments. The house would be mine and Mr. Harrison's for 5 precious hours on Saturday afternoon. Those 5 hours were the longest of my life. After they left, their car filled with weekend bags and giddy anticipation, a profound silence fell over the house. 15 minutes later, Mr. Harrison's discreet sedan pulled into the driveway. He was with a quiet, well-dressed couple in their late 30s. The husband had a kind, serious face. The wife's eyes scanned everything with a sharp, intelligent curiosity. They were Mr. Harrison had told me, a doctor and a lawyer looking to move into a more established neighborhood. They were pre-approved for an all-cash offer. They were perfect. I confined myself to my room on the 3rd floor. As instructed, I sat in my armchair, trying to read. But the words on the page were meaningless. My entire nervous system was focused on the sounds from below. I heard their muffled footsteps on the hardwood floors of the 1st level. The low, professional murmur of Mr. Harrison's voice, pointing out the crown molding. The solid oak doors. My house. My choices. Being sold to strangers. I heard them ascend to the 2nd floor. Their steps directly below me. They were in the master suite. Chloe and Mark's room. No. Eleanor's and my room. The one I had given away. I heard a faucet turn on and off. I heard a closet door slide open. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Each beat a countdown on a clock I couldn't see. This was the ultimate violation. A necessary sacrilege. I was a ghost in my own home, listening to its future, being negotiated without me. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the shrill ring of my cell phone. I fumbled for it, my hands slick with sweat. It was Chloe. My blood ran cold. "Dad," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally loud. "We're on our way back. Mark left his golf shoes in the mudroom. We're only 20 minutes away. We'll just grab them and head back out." 20 minutes. My mind raced. The engineer taking over, calculating variables and probabilities. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. "All right, sweetheart," I said, my voice miraculously calm. "Drive safe." I hung up and immediately called Mr. Harrison's cell. I could hear it vibrate in his pocket 1 floor below. He answered on the 2nd ring. His voice, a low whisper. "Raymond Harrison." "They're coming back," I said, my words clipped and urgent. 20 minutes. You have to be gone in 15. There was no panic on his end. Only a calm. Professional pivot. Understood? "Quincy, we're just finishing up. We'll be out in 10. The next 10 minutes were an agony of suspense. I listened as they made their way downstairs. I heard the front door open and close, with a quiet, final click. I peered through my window and saw their car pull away just as the clock on my bedside table ticked past the 12-minute mark. I sank back into my chair, my body trembling with adrenaline. The silence that returned was different now. It was the silence of a crisis averted. The quiet hum after a near miss. The call came an hour later. "Quincy." "Mr. Harrison said, his voice warm with success. "We have an offer. A solid one." They loved the house's character. The good bones, as they put it. They're offering $860,000, all cash. They're willing to waive most contingencies and can close in 2 weeks. $860,000. The number felt abstract, unreal. It wasn't about the money. It was about the result. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock, opening a door to a new life. "We accept," I said. My voice hoarse. I had to clear my throat. "We accept the offer." The next week was a blur of secret phone calls and discreetly signed documents sent via courier. My life took on a strange, bifurcated quality. By day, I was the quiet, slightly burdensome father, listening to Chloe and Mark recount their fabulous weekend. By night, I was the decisive, clandestine property owner, orchestrating the biggest transaction of my life. One afternoon, Maya knocked on my door. She held a small pot with a single, fragile-looking succulent in it. "I got this for your windowsill," she said, placing it in a patch of sunlight. "To brighten things up?" She looked at me, her young face full of a deep, uncomplicated kindness that made my heart ache. "Grandpa, is everything all right? You seem different lately. Quieter. But also, I don't know, like you're holding a secret." I reached out and patted her hand, my skin papery against her smooth, youthful warmth. "Change is coming." "Sweetheart," I said, the words feeling truer than anything I had said all week. "Good change." I made a silent promise to her then. A promise that this good change would find its way to her. 2. The day of the final signing arrived. The closing was scheduled for 11, p.m. at a title company downtown. My excuse was a follow-up appointment with a heart specialist. A lie that felt both macabre and fitting. I sat in a sterile, windowless conference room that smelled of old paper and dust. The lawyer was a young, efficient woman who explained the mountain of paperwork with a practiced, detached air. I barely heard her words. My focus was on the pen in my hand, a cheap plastic ballpoint that felt impossibly heavy. With each signature, I felt a piece of the past fall away. I signed away the deed, the title, the abstract. I signed away the living room where I had been humiliated, the dining room where I had been ignored, the bedroom where I had grieved for my wife. It was a methodical amputation of a life that was no longer mine. When I pushed the final document across the table, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound, unnerving calm. I had passed the point of no return. "Congratulations, Mr. Adams," the lawyer said, shuffling the papers into a neat stack. "The property is officially sold. The funds will be wired to your new account by the end of the day." I walked out of the building into the bright, indifferent sunlight. It was done. That afternoon, I made the final call to Mr. Harrison. "It's finished," I said. "Excellent news, Quincy," he replied. "The new owners are wonderful people. Their attorney has just sent the formal notification via certified mail to the residents. It should arrive tomorrow. The clock is officially ticking." The clock is ticking. The phrase sent a shiver down my spine. The bomb had been armed and deployed. All that was left was for it to reach its destination. My final act was to prepare my own retreat. I had already used some of my savings to secure a small Blank, modern one-bedroom apartment in a quiet, managed building on the other side of town. It was clean, bright, and blessedly anonymous. That evening, while Chloe and Mark were out to dinner celebrating some small victory at work, I began to pack. I didn't take much. I packed a single suitcase with my clothes. I carefully wrapped the photo of Eleanor and placed it in my briefcase alongside the new bank documents and my will. I packed a box of my most treasured books. The rest, the furniture, the trinkets, the accumulated baggage of a life lived in that house I left behind. I was shedding my old skin. The next day, I was a bundle of nerves. I sat in my room, listening for the mail truck. It arrived at its usual time, just after 2 p.m. I heard the familiar clank of the mailbox lid. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open and Chloe come in, her arms full of shopping bags. I heard her drop her keys and the mail on the small table in the foyer. I couldn't resist. I had to see. I crept to the top of the stairs, my soft-soled slippers making no sound on the old wood. I peered down through the railings. Chloe was sorting through the mail, tossing junk mail onto the floor with a sigh of annoyance. Then she stopped. She was holding a large, stiff envelope. I could see the green and white certified mail sticker from all the way up there. She frowned at it, her brow furrowed in irritation. I saw her look at the return address. A law firm she wouldn't recognize. She held it for a moment, as if weighing it. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the moment of detonation. But then, with a huff of impatience, she did something I never expected. Probably just more junk mail, she muttered to herself, and tossed the envelope onto the table with the rest of the unopened letters and catalogs. She turned and went into the kitchen to put her shopping away. The bomb had arrived. It was in the house, and it was sitting there on the hall table, an unexploded ordnance of truth. Hidden in plain sight, the certified letter sat on the hall table, a rectangular specter of truth in a house built on illusion. For the rest of that day, and all through the night, it remained untouched. A silent, ticking bomb. Every time I had to walk past the foyer, my eyes were drawn to it. Its crisp white corners and the stark green of the certified mail sticker seemed to glow with a malevolent energy. It was a physical manifestation of my secret, lying there in the open, both powerful and ignored. I felt a strange, detached sense of suspense, as if I were watching a film where I already knew the ending. The fuse had been lit, but the characters on screen were blissfully unaware, going about their lives, laughing, planning, dreaming of futures that had already been signed away. That evening was surreal. Chloe and Mark were in high spirits, talking animatedly about a new restaurant they wanted to try. Mark even made a joke at dinner, and Chloe laughed. A genuine, carefree sound that felt like a relic from a different era. They didn't notice my silence, my inability to eat more than a few bites. I was a ghost at my own feast of consequences, invisible to those I was about to haunt. I went to bed early, but sleep was impossible. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, the groans of the old wood, the sigh of the wind outside the eaves. These were sounds I had known for years, sounds that had once brought me comfort. Now they sounded like farewells. The next morning, I woke with a sense of grim finality. Today had to be the day. I couldn't bear another 24 hours of this silent, corrosive waiting. I made my coffee in my room, avoiding the kitchen. Around mid-morning, I heard Chloe come downstairs. I heard her footsteps pause in the foyer. My breath caught in my chest. I crept to my door, opening it just a crack, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I could see her standing by the hall table, phone to her ear, idly sorting through the mail pile with one hand. And then, she picked it up. She picked up the letter. No. I told them the herringbone pattern, she was saying into her phone, her voice sharp with annoyance. She tore the envelope open absently, her attention still on her call. It's not a suggestion. It's what we paid for. Her voice trailed off. Her hand, holding a single, dense sheet of legal paper, began to tremble. The silence that followed was more explosive than any shout. I watched as the color drained from her face, leaving it a pale, waxy white. Her phone slipped from her other hand, clattering onto the hardwood floor. She didn't seem to notice. Her eyes, wide with a dawning, horrified disbelief, scanned the page again, and then a third time. No, she whispered. The word a tiny, fragile sound. No, this is a mistake. She looked up, her wild eyes scanning the empty hallway as if searching for an explanation. Then, a sound started in her throat. A low, guttural noise of pure, uncomprehending rage. It built until it erupted into a shriek that tore through the quiet of the house, a sound of an animal caught in a trap. Mark. I heard his heavy footsteps pounding down the stairs from their second-floor office. Chloe, what is it? What's wrong? This she screamed, shoving the paper at him. Read this. It's an eviction notice. It says the house has been sold. It says we have 30 days to get out. What kind of sick, twisted joke is this? I watched from my hiding place as Mark's face went through the same rapid-fire transformation from confusion to disbelief, to a dark, flushing anger. This is insane. He stammered. Who are these people? Who the hell is the new owner? And then, as if a single, terrible thought had struck them both at the same moment, Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes, burning with a furious, venomous light, stared directly up the staircase towards my floor. I had already retreated into my room and locked the door. I was sitting in my armchair, my hands resting on the worn leather. When my phone began to ring, I looked at the screen. It was Chloe. I let it ring twice, then took a slow, steadying breath, and answered. Hello, Chloe, I said, my voice quiet. You! The word was a blast of pure hatred. So loud, I had to pull the phone away from my ear. What did you do? How could you let this happen? Someone sold our house out from under us, and you did nothing. I could hear Mark shouting in the background, a chaotic symphony of fury and panic. Then, another voice joined the fray. Tinny, through the phone's speaker. They must have put me on speakerphone. It was Leo. Chloe must have called him in her initial panic. Dad. What the hell is going on? Leo demanded. Chloe's hysterical. She's saying you've all been evicted. I let them vent. I let the accusations, the blame, the raw, unfiltered rage wash over me. It was a tidal wave of their own making, and I was the unmoving rock it was breaking against. When there was finally a pause, a moment for them to gasp for breath, I spoke. My voice was as calm and even as a frozen lake. I didn't let it happen. I said, I made it happen. A profound, absolute silence fell on the other end of the line. It was so complete, I thought for a moment they had hung up. I could picture them, standing frozen in the foyer. The legal notice probably still clutched in Chloe's hand. Their faces, masks of stunned incomprehension. What? What did you just say? Chloe finally whispered. Her voice, a strangled thread. I sold the house. Chloe, I said, enunciating each word with a deliberate, surgical precision. Because it was my house to sell. I owned it. I have owned it since the year after your mother died. The silence that followed this was different. It was heavier. Deeper. It was the sound of an entire world crumbling to dust. The sound of a reality they had built their lives upon being vaporized in a single sentence. That's not possible. Mark stammered, his voice weak with shock. You're on a pension. You couldn't afford. And here it was. The final secret. The cornerstone of it all. In the spring of 2005, I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. I bought a lottery ticket at the corner store where I always bought my newspaper. That ticket won. After taxes. The payout was just over $1.8 million. Your mother and I decided to keep it a secret. We didn't want the money to change you. It seems we were too late for that. I paid for that house in cash. Chloe, every check I wrote you for rent was a gift. Every utility bill I paid was a subsidy. I wasn't your tenant. You were my guests. I heard a sharp, ragged gasp, then a sob. It wasn't a cry of sadness or remorse. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated loss. The sound of an heiress discovering her inheritance was a mirage. Mark was babbling. Something about lawyers, about contesting the sale, but his words lacked conviction. He knew. They both knew it was the truth. It explained everything. Then, Leo's voice cut through the haze, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. So, all that money, he said, his voice dripping with a horrified, desperate avarice. That $1 million. It's really gone. You spent it on the house. Not all of it. Leo, I said, a good portion of it has been sitting in a very healthy investment account for nearly 20 years. It's grown quite a bit. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. The frantic calculations. The shock was already being replaced by the next inevitable emotion, greed. But I had one final move to make, one final truth to deliver. But none of you need to worry about that money, I said, because I have already taken care of it. Yesterday, I finalized the legal paperwork to place the entirety of my remaining estate into an irrevocable trust. I paused, letting the legal term sink in. The sole beneficiary of that trust, I continued, is Maya. It will pay for her college education, her graduate school, a down payment on a home, and her future. All of it. She was the only one who treated me like family. Not an ATM or a burden. She was the only one who showed me kindness without a price tag. She earned it. This was the killing blow. The final, absolute checkmate. The line was silent for a long moment. And then Chloe's voice came back. No longer shouting, but broken. Defeated. How could you do this to us? We're your children. A child doesn't give their 77-year-old father an ultimatum to pay more money or be thrown out on the street. I said. And for the first time, a tremor of my own long-buried pain entered my voice. You stopped being my children and started being my landlords. Well, the lease is terminated. And with that, I ended the call. I immediately blocked their numbers. I blocked Mark's. I blocked Leo's. It was a simple, digital act, but it felt like slamming a heavy oak door on the past. The severing was complete. I stood up and walked over to the window. My new apartment looked out over a small, Quiet park. I could see people walking their dogs. Children playing on the swings. It was a world away from the silent, gilded cage I had just escaped. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding for 20 years finally escaped my lungs in a long, shuddering sigh. The weight, the suffocating the specters, crushing weight of the secret, of the daily deceptions, of the constant, biting loneliness was gone. He felt light. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, quiet peace. I hadn't set out to destroy them. I had only set out to save myself. The money hadn't been the poison Eleanor had feared. It had simply been an accelerant. It had sped them along the path of greed and entitlement they were already on. I didn't take anything from them. They truly possessed. I only took away their illusions. In the end, I realized I hadn't lost a family. You can't lose something you never really had. I had just finally stopped paying for a counterfeit version of it. A week later, there was a soft knock on my new door. I opened it to find Maya standing there. Her face was etched with a sad, weary wisdom beyond her years. In her hands, she held the small, potted succulent from my old windowsill. "I thought you might want this," she said. Her voice quiet. They're a mess, Grandpa, but I had to come see you." "I'm glad you did, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was gratitude. It was love. It was hope. I took the small plant from her and placed it on the windowsill in my new living room, right in a patch of bright, warm sunlight. She came in, and I made us tea. We sat on my new sofa, looking out at the park, not talking about the past, or the money, or the wreckage of the family. We talked about her classes. We talked about the ocean. We talked about the future. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt like I was finally home,